So you want to know the right social media video sizes in 2020? Well, here you go, because in this video, I'm going to give you the lowdown on which ratio is which, why you'd choose one over the other, and stick around to the end because I'm going to go through rapid fire, quick 5 tips on how to repurpose video content natively. Let's go. G'day guys, I'm Ben Amos from Engage Video Marketing, and on this channel I share tips, tricks and strategies to help you engage your ideal audience to action through effective video marketing strategy. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss each new video as it releases. So when you're thinking about repurposing video content specifically for native use on social media platforms, then sometimes it can be very confusing as to which ratio you should be using. In other words, what size should the video be? You've got vertical video, square video, horizontal video. You've got all sorts of sizes of video in between that are possible to be done on different platforms these days. No longer is it one size fits all. So in this video, I'm going to demystify the common video ratios that you'll be considering as part of your social media video strategy in 2020 and beyond. So let's get into it. Now, the fact is that right now, most video platforms will actually accept a range of different ratios for the videos. Everything from ultra wide, cinematic widescreen, up to vertical videos and all sorts of things in between. And when we're referring to these common screen sizes, I'm going to be talking about them as a ratio and also share with you the common pixel dimensions which you'll typically see across different platforms. And the first is a 16:9 ratio, commonly referred to as widescreen video, and you'll often find that as HD or high definition video. And for that, we've got a pixel dimensions of 1920 by 1080. This is a common format which you'll often also find in 4K video. 4K video is typically 3840 by 2160 when it comes to pixels. The next common ratio that we'll find is 1:1 or square video. Now, square video is typically 1080 by 1080, although any square resolution will actually work on most platforms. The next key ratio that you'll see is 4:5. Now this is where we're starting to get into vertical video formats, but not full vertical video yet. And here at 4:5, we're commonly working with a frame that's 1080 by 1350 pixels. And finally, we talk about full vertical video, which is 9:16. And here the screen ratio is typically 1080 by 1920. Now, of course, these ratios can be used at different pixel resolutions, but on the screen here, you see the most common resolutions used at these different screen ratios. Okay, so now the big question is, when do you use each of these when it comes to creating video content for different video platforms? Well, let's start with YouTube. Now for YouTube, I'd primarily focus on the widescreen aspect ratios. From 4K down to high definition is perfect. So you're going to be considering a 4K resolution at 3840 by 2160, or more commonly, high definition at 1920 by 1080. Now, although YouTube does allow other aspect ratios, what I'm focusing on here is the core ratio that you'll probably want to be considering. Now, let's move on to Facebook video, and first let's talk about the Facebook feed. Recognizing that most people are using the Facebook feed using their mobile devices, we want to maximize the amount of screen real estate that we can command with our videos on the mobile devices. So here I most commonly recommend using 1:1 or square aspect ratio videos or 4:5 vertical videos. You want to steer away from using full vertical, which is that 9:16, because it'll often be truncated or cut off in many news feeds. When it comes to creating video creative for Facebook or Instagram ads, this is where I'd definitely be recommending a 4:5 aspect ratio, or there is another aspect ratio which is 2:3, but 4:5 is really the sweet spot for ad creative. Now, let's talk Instagram. When we're talking Instagram, there's really two different video platforms that need to be considered differently. First of all, there's the Instagram feed, and then there's Instagram stories. And you can think about the same approach here for whether it be Snapchat stories or Facebook stories as well. Let's talk first about the feed. Similarly to Facebook, you're going to focus on 1:1 video or 4:5 video if it's destined for the feed, remembering that it needs to be under 60 seconds in order for it to play within the feed. When you get to Instagram TV, you can go up to 10 minutes, but here you're going to be wanting to create vertical video, which is optimized for a 4:5 frame. So what I mean by that is you're going to, for Instagram TV, create a vertical video in full 9:16, but pay attention to that critical center section, which is about that 4:5 aspect ratio, because when the Instagram TV video is played within the feed, you're going to get the top and the bottom cut off, and it's going to show the 4:5 section. So make sure that nothing critical is in that section of the video. Now let's talk about stories. This is where it needs to be created with full vertical video in mind. And we're talking here about the 9:16 aspect ratio. So really create your video with that aspect ratio in mind and capitalize on the full vertical experience that you can provide for your viewers. Okay, now let's move over to LinkedIn. LinkedIn as a video platform, again, is primarily used within a mobile feed. So with that in mind, similar to Facebook, you're gonna focus on one-to-one. You do often see much more 16:9 or widescreen video on LinkedIn as well, but I recommend using one-to-one video within the LinkedIn feed because it looks beautiful on both handheld devices and in the desktop experience as well. So they're the key video platforms that I want you to consider which aspect ratio is going to work for you. But before you go, I wanna share 5 quick tips on how to think about repurposing video content natively for these different platforms in these different aspect ratios. And the first tip is shoot with the end in mind. Ideally, film your content in a 4K aspect ratio and think about a wider angle of view so that you can actually fit more within the frame and allows you to crop in to the video without losing important elements of your shot. Tip number 2 is resize your video to fill the entire aspect ratio frame where possible, so that you don't end up with bars on the top or the bottom or the sides. Now, when you can't scale your video all the way to fit the entire frame, then you need to consider what you're going to do with the empty space within the top and the bottom or the left and the right of the frame. Now, this is where I recommend using some kind of branding, which is using your brand color or adding in a headline or using some text elements to actually support the content of the video. And tip number 3 is consider the sound off viewer. So on many of the platforms that I've mentioned here, you want to be considering adding burnt-in captions using a tool like quick.io. By adding burnt-in captions to your videos, you're going to be natively creating these videos for maximum engagement on these sound off viewing platforms. And tip number 4 is I recommend you develop a workflow for repurposing your video content to maximize the approach you take. Now, what I mean by this is typically it's going to make sense to create the wider format video first. So if you're going to create a 16:9 or widescreen version of your video, then start with that one. Get that edit complete and take your widescreen video and then resize those elements to suit the intended frame size. Tip number 5 is when repurposing these videos for different platforms, I want you to make sure that you change or remove any platform specific calls to action. So if, for example, in your YouTube video, you mention things like subscribe or hit the bell icon, then you want to make sure that you actually remove those elements when you're repurposing for Facebook or Instagram, for example. Similarly, if you're repurposing for Instagram stories, then maybe you want to record an extra section where you say things like swipe up to get to the link. When you're being strategic about repurposing videos natively across different aspect ratios, you can be much more effective at creating video content that engages your ideal audience and drives them to take the action. So I hope you found that useful, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Let me know how you're currently repurposing your videos across different platforms as well. And then once you've done that, I want you to head on over and watch this video right here next, where I take you deeper into the world of video marketing strategy to grow your business. Take care, and I'll see ya in the next video real soon.